morning. Thank you everybody for showing up this morning. This is a presentation that I'm putting on that has to do with my oyster farm that I started a few years ago and the progress that I've made through the few years that I've been doing it. First of all, I'd like to tell you a little bit about myself and why I started my why I started the oyster farm. And I grew up here on the islands. My grandparents lived here, and in the summertime, through grade schools, I would come down to the islands and visit with my grandparents. I got interested. I don't know that it's where I got interested in aquaculture, but as a young boy, all the tide pools that were around with all the little creatures and stuff made me interested in the waterfront. And also my grandfather was a lobster fisherman, so I would go out lobster fishing with him and spent a lot of time on the water. Moving along, I started working with the town later on in my life as working with the Harbor and Waterfront Committee. And one thing led to another, and I became the harbor master. And during my harbor master time, I had a lot of people who were interested in filling out applications, which I had to help them with, to apply to the Army Corps of Engineers, which requires a permit from them in order to set up a structure on the water. Also with the DMR, Department of Marine Resources, is a organization, well, it's a state-run organization that deals with everything that happens on the waterfront. So we had to take in all of those pieces in order to be able to put a farm together. And I learned how to do that. So I wanted to promote it because what I saw is aquaculture is a renewable resource. And over my years, I've seen how our natural resources have been depleted over the years, whether it's fishing for codfish. I mean, that used to be huge. Tuna fishing. Lobstering is pretty well held its own because it has good rules and regulations with it, the same as what they're developing for aquaculture, and making sure that a product is developed in a way that it's safe to eat. And through those organizations, you need to have a license. So it's, like anything you do, it costs you money. You have to get your licenses and permits to be able to do this type of work. So anyway, getting back to, I became the harbor master and interested in doing aquaculture and the marine resources. I decided that I wanted to find out whether I could grow oysters. Other people were doing it, so I figured I should be able to do that too. My wife, Gail, she stood behind me on this and put up with all my preparations, and it's not an inexpensive business either, so I thank her for that, being able to support me. In the beginning, I had to develop the equipment that I use. The oyster bags that we float them in, I have a tumbler that I made. It was the fun part of it. But finally, I got all my equipment together, and I've been raising the oysters now for 7 or 8 years now, going on 8 years. And I've accomplished what I set out to do because I can grow oysters, and I have a very good product, very good tasting. I mean, I looked during my time as the harbor master, I was able to look at the different, I got familiar with all of the waters in Harpswell, and I was able to look and find a place where I felt was the best place to grow oysters. And I'm just below the Orr's Island Bridge. We have an incoming, outgoing tide, It's to open ocean, which I think is a big secret on the taste of them. And the reason I say that is because they get a lot more nutrients. It's in that open ocean water and not up inside the inlets and bays where they have a brackish water that I don't feel gives it a very good taste. And there are a lot of people who do that. So getting right down to that, I'm going to go through what I have for equipment and how I go through the process of growing oysters. The first thing I do, of course, I said to the permits and the licenses, and you get that all straightened out and you put the equipment put together. I have to buy seed, and I buy seed, what we call seed. Some people call it spat, which is grown in a what's the word? Nursery. It's a nursery, and the one I buy from is up in Muscongas Bay, and they have big vats, and they collect the spawn from these oysters, and the spawn comes. It's very small. It's probably half or maybe the size of my little fingernail, and it comes in a bag. That bag has in it, I'm going to guess it has about 20,000 oysters in that little bag, and these are the little spat seeds. And what I do with those is I put them into a floating bag, and you can see some of them here. When I put these in the water, it's a fine mesh bag so that they won't fall through. There's a pontoon on either side, and it floats on top of the water. They grow the first season, and then at the beginning of the next season, I have to transfer those into a larger mesh bag. The larger mesh allows more water to flow, which allows the oysters to grow. This is what these guys have grown into. Not the whole bag. There's probably 1,000 in here. And those have grown to the size where they won't fall through the next mesh. So I'll start out the second season. This bag right here will make 2 bags. And those will grow. Halfway through the season, I will end up with about 20% of these will reach market size in August, early August. They'll reach a marketable size, which this one here is 2.5 inches, and I like to see, 3 inches I like to have is a really good oyster. I feel I've seen some small oysters being sold, and I just feel like there should be a little bit more to it. So I'll let them grow. So at the end of the second season, I've harvested 20% of this amount of oysters, minus the loss, which as in everything you get into, there's a percentage of loss. The third year, this 60% here will be reaching, they'll be all marketable size by the first part, July, August. I'm harvesting the 60% on that third year. There's a lot of work to it. Oh, I mentioned down here that I put these into a larger mesh bag, and some of them will start to come through. Well, that's a beginning of my maintenance program, because what I'll have to do is turn these things over, poke those all back inside, and then once that's going. In the springtime, you get a lot of growth. There's like seagrass and even other crustaceans, barnacles. This year I had a lot of mussels, little teeny mussels that grew in there. And I had to separate those out. There's an interesting thing about mussels and oysters, and I'll tell you that in just a second. So what I have to do is I'll go out and I'll pull these bags onto my boat. The first couple of years, what I did is I took a brush and I scrubbed them all down and put them back in, and that became quite a bit of work because I had to do that twice during the season. And I've changed that over, so what I do now is I will take these out of the water and I'll do like 15 of them or 20 in a day, but I'll bring 20 clean bags out with me so that I'll take these, put them into clean bags, then I'm not working out on the water and I can just take them home, pressure wash and clean them and keep a rotation that way. It saves a lot of labor. And I mentioned that I had to make my equipment, and there was the plastic culvert that you see on the sides of roads sometimes. And I just cut a rib out of that, made 2 of those and put the wire on the inside. Those allow me to put those on casters so that I can roll it. The casters, you know, they flip in and out so that I can change the direction, whether it's tipping this way or that way. And I'll roll those, and the small ones will fall into this bucket, and then the bigger ones will fall out of the end onto the deck. And that's what I have for marketable oysters out of that one tumble, which is really good. I said that I get back to these oysters, and I had mentioned mussels and how mussels and oysters are different. And this will also take me back to the nursery and what the nursery does. Oysters, like lobsters, do the same thing, mussels, any of those shellfish. When the spawn goes out, it's light and it floats on top of the water. Then it sinks to the bottom, and when it sinks to the bottom, it attaches to anything that it grabs a hold of. An oyster can only do that once in its lifetime. Its initial attachment is, if you detach it, it's not going to attach to anything else. Unlike a mussel, and I did this just the other day, I had some mussels and I separated them all. And the next time I went out, they were all attached to each other again. They'll attach. And the reason I was taking the mussels out of the seed that I was growing is because I didn't want them attaching to all of my oysters. So the advantage of having them raised in a nursery is what they do is they have these big tanks, and that spat will sink to the bottom, and they have crushed up oyster shell on the bottom of them. So each oyster will grab a hold of a piece of oyster shell, just a grain of sand sort of. And that prevents these oysters from attaching to each other. Second batch I bought off from an independent oyster grower who grows his own seed, and I ended up with a lot of double oysters. So they taste just as good, but it's a little bit. Throughout the season, I have all this maintenance that I have to do, changing out bags, and then it comes this time of year, or winter, in the fall. An oyster will go into, I'll call it hibernation, at 50 degrees. So when the ocean temperature gets down to 50 degrees, then they stop feeding. What I do is, a lot of people, they just sink them to the bottom. Where I am, I found it to be mud. So when I sank them to the bottom, they got suffocated in the mud, and I lost a bunch of oysters that way. When I first started and I bought some oysters from a man, he said, if you haven't lost 1 million oysters, you're not an oyster farmer. I haven't lost 1 million, but I understand what he was saying. So what I do is these bags with the pontoons on them. Up here, I'll take one of the pontoons off. And then that will take the bag from floating horizontally to a vertical. And the oysters will be down lower in the water. They ride out storms better that way. And I just, you just don't want them floating on top of the water. Not so much for freezing, but when you're only about that deep in the water, I don't want to take the chance of having things freeze up. Where these oysters are, 10 years ago used to freeze up and I had to worry about ice kegs coming down through. And I don't see that anymore. Another change in the ocean. So I put these all to bed, so to speak, and they sit out the winter. The ones that I had for this year just went through 2 storms. I'm not sure what I'll have for loss. I'm sure there'll be some in there, maybe a bag broken open or whatnot. But the whole line of these that I had out, on the first storm it dragged the mooring, and now they're all wrapped around this mooring ball thing. And I took my boat out of the water for that storm. And then I put it back in and went up and checked it out, and it was just, that's going to take me a while to get those under. So, and the water's cold and the air is cold, and I didn't want to do it this time of year, so I feel they're safe where they are. But the elements are something you have to deal with out on the water. I can't just go out any day of the week because I have to depend on where the wind is coming from. I'm on the east side of Woods Island, so if there's a west wind, I'm right in the lee. I don't have anything to bother about. But every day, the wind will swing around to the south, southwest, and it'll come right up the bay. So by 11 o'clock, 10 or noon time, it's getting too windy for me to work out there. So that everything's dictated by the weather. So now I've put them all to bed. And in the spring, like I said, on the 3rd year, and I'm a few years out from that, in the spring I'll have oysters to be able to sell so that I have that rotation going. I'm going to open it up to some questions because I'm not a long speaker kind of person. And any questions you might have, if that triggers any of your curiosity or not.
So I know we were hiking the other day and we saw, and it must have been an oyster farm.
Mm-hmm.
So do you have to choose a certain spot where you're going to do it? I mean, is it regulated that this is your spot?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yeah. I didn't get that much into the licensing. I just sort of brushed over it, but yes, if you have a structure on the water, it has to be approved by the Army Corps of Engineers. The DMR also has, that there may be eelgrass in the area. Eelgrass is supposedly real important for growing other shellfish and lobsters and that type of stuff. So there are a lot of rules about where you can go and where you can't. I have to design what I'm going to have for an oyster field. This here, that's not 400 square feet, but I'm allowed 400 square feet to grow my oysters, which is more than enough space. I'm not even using up. I have 2 leases and I'm not using them all, just simply because a one-man operation can't do that.
How old is oyster farming? I mean, versus natural?
What's this now?
How old is oyster farming? Has it been going
oyster
on?
farming goes back a long ways, yes. New York Harbor used to be a huge oyster production. They used to sell them. They used to sail them back over in barrels over to England. And New York Harbor oysters was a food that could be eaten by the rich and the poor. It's really good, so you're willing to pay for it. And if you're really hungry, it doesn't taste too bad. So anyway, New York Harbor, and like I said, the depletion of stocks, natural resources. Of course, that finally got to a point where they didn't have that abundance of oysters. And that is one place where they did start doing some conservation, where they stopped, okay, let's stop taking these oysters out and see if they'll grow back. So I'd say that was one example of. So that would be back in the 1700s.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is oyster farming similar to mussel farming, or is it totally different?
It is different. It is different. I grow these here in the bag, just bags. That's the way the oysters are. You can grow scallops in there. You could grow some mussels in there, but like I said, they attach to anything they can get a hold of. And one of the ways that they grow oysters, I mean, they use it in Portland. I've seen how they do it. Is they have a big float and they have ropes that go down, and they seed the ropes, and the ropes grow the mussels on. The ducks love them, so it's quite expensive because you got to put a net all the way around your big float in order to keep the ducks from eating them. But that's how they grow them on ropes. Prince Edward Island, if you go up there, you see all the aquaculture buoys all over the place. Every place is covered with them. And they grow a lot of mussels up there. It's what you see in most of your restaurants. Mm-hmm. If you go to Portland, they're all grown right basically in the Portland area.
And what else contributes to that being a good product, being tasty, or distinguishes it? You talked about, having sort of access to the ocean water.
Yeah.
Some of that is that. You think that's really key?
Yes, it is. It's definitely key. Up in Damariscotta, up in the Damariscotta River where they grow the oysters up there, what they do when they get ready to market is they will move their oysters down the river out into some more salt water, a saltier water with more nutrients and stuff, and then they transport them from there. So that's another whole step. But yeah, it's the nutrients and the good ocean water that I call it fresh salt water. Yeah.
Clever.
Yeah.
I heard that oysters can clean water. Is that true?
They can. Yeah, it's amazing what they can clean. In Quahog, and I usually get off subject. I'll come back. Up in Quahog Bay, there's the Snow Island Conservatory, which they started growing oysters up there. The man that owns the place could afford to do much anything he wanted to, but he was also a conservationist, and his caretaker decided that he wanted to grow some oysters, and then it was taken from there. And they have been able, the waters in Quahog Bay it was prohibited to grow shellfish in Quahog Bay. You can grow them in Quahog Bay now because the oysters have cleaned that water so much that they've, the testing helps as well because the state really can't afford to test everywhere. Mm-hmm. But they clean up water, and one of the exhibits that they put on when they're showing what oysters can clean is they'll put them in a glass aquarium, I guess if you want to call it that. It'll be all muddied up, and they'll put some oysters in there, and in a short period of time they've cleaned all of that water. An oyster can siphon and clean 50 gallons of water a day. So if you're looking at a lot of oysters, you're cleaning a lot of water.
But do they retain pollutants? Does that make them unsafe to eat if they're in certain water until it's cleaned? I mean, do they collect the toxins or?
Well, the toxins, the American oyster that I grow is indigenous to the area. There's also the European oyster, which was seeded in by the Department of Marine Resources because the stocks of oysters was getting depleted here, and they figured that they'd put the European oyster in. The European oyster will collect toxins, and what I mean by toxins is in the springtime, your plants will pollinate the same as all plants do, and some of them are poisonous. The European oyster will retain those spores. whereas the American oyster will reject them. If you were growing them in an area where there was near a sewage treatment plant or something like that, you wouldn't want to eat those oysters, of course. So the state, with the rules and regulations they have set up, there's certain areas where you can grow oysters, and there are other areas that are prohibited to be able to. A lot of that has to do with the testing of the water. I live down on Bailey Island, and I have to travel all the way up to Orr's Island in order to tend my oysters. And I'm on the open water on Bailey Island, and there's no reason why that's polluted. But years ago, when I was a young boy growing up, they had overboard discharges from all the cottages and stuff, and they just dump into the water. So they deemed them all polluted. And the state has to put together a testing program where they test the water to see that it's free of any of that stuff. And we know it is, but we've got 216 miles of shorefront, and the state's not going to come and test all that. But I wish they would down towards Bailey Island, because it would really save me a lot of travel.
How much does it cost to build one cage?
How much does it cost? Well, I'm going to say that it cost, when I first started doing this, $20.
And now?
Probably 30. Yeah, and there's not really a lot to it. It's a plastic mesh bag with 2 pontoons on the side. You would say, how simple is that?
And how many do you have?
I have probably about 80 bags now. Yeah, I have 80. And I put them together myself. If you buy them, if you went up to a marine supply dealer and bought them all made, now you're looking at $60, $70 a piece. So putting them together yourself. My hands are getting sore, so I can't do that anymore. I mean, I don't want to, because it's just hard.
Jim, I don't think I'm clear about the tumbler. When you dump the oysters out of the bag into the tumbler and it's cleaning them, or I don't understand its function.
Well, I'll take one of these bags on board, and I'll dump it into a 5-gallon bucket. Get a 5-gallon, something that I can pick up and I can toss into the end of the tumbler.
Right?
And I have the caster wheel set so that I can tip it either way, and I'll tip it so it goes down. So the oysters will be in here, and then I just hand turn it. I mean, there are easier ways to do it with maybe a motor or something, but I hand turn it, and they all end up down on the other end. Then I flip them around, and by the time they reach the other end, the big ones are falling out of the end of it, and the smaller ones are falling in a tray underneath.
Okay.
So then I can rebag those and put them back to grow more.
Ah, okay.
So it's and it's just there's a mesh on here. They just fall through that.
So you're separating the big ones that are ready to be eaten from the small ones.
Separating
that you
the small
put
ones from the larger
okay,
ones.
That's it.
Yeah,
All right.
yeah.
Okay.
It's when I first started, before I built this, it was put them in a tray, go through, pick out the big ones.
All right.
And I really didn't mind doing that, but
Increased efficiency. Right?
I found that to be, yeah. Another, and you run into these things that you can. I think about how can I do this easier?
Yeah.
How can I save labor? And this past couple of years, what I've done is when I get ready to sink the bags to the bottom, I mean, I don't sink to the bottom, but when I turn them so they're vertical, I take the pontoon off. And what I was doing is I'd bring in the pontoons home with me, and then in the spring I'd go out and put the pontoons back on. And this year I found that I can put more oysters in one bag just by simply reattaching that float alongside of the other one, so that I have 2. And also in the springtime when I go out and I have to do it, my pontoons are all there.
Yeah, you don't have to haul.
So that's going to help me a lot this year.
Have you made any changes in The construction of your bags?
The bags are pretty much they're pretty much the same thing. It's like wrapping a Christmas present. You know, you cut the ends and you fold them in and then you clip them together. You can see that white cord that comes down. That's a bungee cord. And what I did when I was first starting out, and that holds the flap shut so that they don't fall out. And the first couple of years, what I was doing is I was going through a lot of tie wraps because I tie wrap each one. And then I saw this being used, so I went to the bungee cord, and it's got a clip on the end of it, and you just stretch it down over and hook it. I mean, couldn't be easier. So that's a change that I've made in the bags.
Better for the environment too.
Yeah, because I'd by the end of the year I'd have a 5-gallon bucket full of used tie wraps, and they don't recycle. Goes right into the trash.
About how many oyster farmers are there in the area here?
When I started Harbor Master in 2005, there were 2 oyster growers in town. There was one down Basin Point, and there was another one up where the New Meadows River comes into Harriseket there. Ken Beebe and Bob Hersey. Those 2 people were the only 2. There are over 100 now.
In this area?
Yep. There are 100. Well, this area isn't all that small.
No, you're right.
How often do you have to buy the little ones?
You do that annually.
Oh,
Each year you start out with a new set of seed, and then after the 3rd year, 4th year, now you're in your rotation where you keep seeding them in. I don't plan to buy any seed this coming year. I've accomplished what I set out to do, and it's a lot of work, and I'd rather use my boat for pleasure than I would for work, even though I really enjoy doing it. So, and I'll miss it. But
Is there a mortality issue with them, or is it significant?
There's a 35, almost a 40% loss. Yeah, so I'm losing 400 oysters out of that. 10,000, is it? Do the math in my head. Yeah, so it's a loss. And back what I was saying to Jeff, I says, that a guy I bought some oysters from said that if you haven't lost 1 million oysters, you're not an oyster farmer. But so there's a lot.
And are there oyster farms in the area sort of your size, or are some of them, like bigger that they really do this sort of wholesale kind of stuff? Some of them are bigger.
My lease is what they call an LPA. I dubbed it like a limited purpose aquaculture, which I'm sure that's what it means, but if you find out different, let me know. So
You're
there's
safe with me, I will.
limited production aquaculture, and it also limits you where you can sell it. You can sell from your home. I can sell off from the site, and I can sell to somebody who is a certified seafood dealer or has a certified seafood license as restaurants. Not all, but most have.
So are you going to sell your permit? So you're moving out of the business. Do you think someone's going to speak to you about that, to have that area? Or
That
does it
goes
not
along
look
with the
like that?
limited purpose. You cannot sell your site.
Okay,
Somebody else has to. If you leave that location, somebody else can apply for that location. So that if I was to sell, if I had somebody that wanted to take over that location, of course now it takes 6 months to a year to be able to get your permit to be in there. So I could sell all my gear, the stuff that I own personally, but I can't sell the location. There are 3 types of leases. You have the LPA, which I was just talking about. Then you have an experimental lease. And in an experimental lease, you're growing oysters to find out whether you can grow them in that area. It may be for educational purpose. University of Maine does quite a bit of it. And that allows you, I can grow 400 square feet of surface coverage with my LPA license. The experimental lease, you can get up to 4 acres. So you can get 4 acres. And then there's a standard lease that comes after that. In the standard lease, you can get up to 100 acres. Over in McCoy Bay, they have standard leases over there. I think 80 acres or something like that they put in. And it's not easy because you have people who don't want it in the backyard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how much time do you put in? I mean, I imagine it's seasonal, right? I mean, if somebody were thinking about doing
Somebody
something
was thinking
your
about
size,
it.
we tell them to think again.
I had a friend of mine that said that.
Yeah.
He's out of the business now, but yeah, the first couple of years, it's trial and error, and if you haven't done it before, it's a lot of labor. After the third, fourth, 3-year learning curve,
Yeah.
this is more like a 5-year learning curve, to where I have it so that it's manageable with the swapping out of bags and the pontoons and the different things that I've made possible for me to cut down on the labor. Plus, it's a long trip up there, and I don't want to keep going back and forth.
You mentioned that you can sell your equipment. What about the oysters?
The oysters I sell out of the house, yeah. I can
when
sell the oysters. I can sell the whole operation, bags, oysters, and everything to somebody who wants
Okay.
to buy it.
And then that person would just have to get the permit
Yeah,
for either that place or
he'd have
someplace
to.
else.
Yeah, he'd probably already have one and just add it to his. Yeah, I think that's probably the way that would work. The one thing I really enjoy about this is being on the water. Like I said in the beginning, I grew up down here going lobstering with my grandfather and tide pools and rowing around in a rowboat, and things were a lot different back then. Hardly anybody had an outboard motor, so it was like all the kids. I mean, each fisherman had a rowboat that he would go out to his boat on, and then he'd tie it up on the dock when they got home. And we as kids would pick the one we liked the best and spend the rest of the afternoon rowing around. You don't see that anymore. Talking about the different leases, and you get up to a standard lease. Yes, you can sell that acreage. You can't with the experimental or the LPA. Now I brought some oysters in with me for you to sample. If you would like to have an oyster, I'll show you how to open it, and we can enjoy one of those. I've done this twice before, and I thought about, should I in the beginning ask who likes to eat oysters, and to see what would take place there, and then also how do you eat your oyster? A lot of people, when I was younger and we get down to Jay's Oyster Bar or something like that, you were eating oysters because everybody else was, but you weren't really eating them. You would just, okay, that make me hungry for another beer. So, but what I recommend to people, and they'll come to the house and I'll show them how to open an oyster, and also have them take the oyster, put it in their mouth, and chew it up. Get the taste of the salt, chew it up, get the taste of the oyster, and then the inductor muscle that opens and closes the shell is just like a scallop, and it's just as sweet as you can imagine. So you get the 3 different tastes. You get the briny taste, the seafood taste, and then the sweet taste. These I've had in my refrigerator for probably 3 weeks now anyway. And the important thing about oysters, which I really want to bring up, because if you're buying oysters, the temperature that you keep them at is critical. Because once they get above 50 degrees, then it's like any seafood. It starts to spoil. And you may not notice it when you eat it. but afterwards, it may not be so fun.
You'll
too
notice
much
it
fun.
then, right?
So the critical point on oysters is 50 degrees. Like I mentioned, when the water temperature gets down to 50 degrees, I sink them. When it gets to 50 degrees, come back up to 50 degrees, then I'll bring them up back on top of the water. Because that's when all your everything's starting to grow again. So when people come to the house, I say, okay, you got these oysters, they're going directly into the fridge, right? It's critical. Don't get sick. So when people talk about getting sick on oysters, it's not the oyster. It's how they've been handled.
But doesn't the water get warmer than 50 degrees sometime in part of the year?
Oh, sure.
So doesn't hurt them when they're in the water?
The warmer it is, the faster they grow.
I see. Okay, so not when they're in their
So I'm
natural
told.
environment.
I'm happy with the rate that they're growing for me, and yeah, surface temperature will get up to 70 degrees. Yeah. But that's it, they're just basking in the sun, having a good summer.
Happy oyster.
Happy oyster. That's funny. My bookkeeper, Mary Beth, she loves to tell stories and whatnot. And so when I started the oyster business, she says you should name your oyster business the Noisy Oyster. And I said, why is that? She says, well, what noise annoys an oyster? I said, I don't know, Mary Beth. What noise annoys an oyster? And she said, a noisy noise annoys an oyster. So, this is what my oysters look like. When you look at an oyster, they call this the dish, where it's down on the bottom. And what you look for is that it's got a hump in the back. The bigger the hump, the more oyster there is inside. If you get a flat oyster, you're not going to get you get a flat oyster. When you're opening an oyster, if you're doing it this way, you want to protect your hand, of course. And they sell gloves to do this with. But if you don't have one, I put this in my hand, so that if I stab myself, it's going to hurt, but it's not going to poke a hole in me. And what I do is I go right into this little nose of it. And there's a little channel that goes in there. The muscle, the hinge is right in here. So what I do, and I won't try not to mess up Dave's floor, is I'll stick that in there and it's open. So that's stuck in there. I've already broken the hinge. And I give it a twist. This one, the shell broke that way, but that muscle that I was talking about is attached to both the top and bottom shell. So if that hadn't have broken off, I would have slid this up around the top side of the shell in order to cut that muscle. Like that. So when I was talking about the different tastes of the oyster, you have the liquid in there, which is what I call sweet, fresh salt water. It's not the salt water you get out there in the bay. If you get a mouthful, it's going to make you sick. It's very good. Then you have the oyster itself, and then the muscle. The muscle that pulls that shell together is right there, and that's the sweet part. And you have to separate that. So you break this membrane here, and then you scrape the muscle off. Make sure it's free, so it'll slide into your mouth. And like I say, I taste the water, and then I eat the animal, and then that muscle I sort of save off to the side of my mouth, and save that for the last sweetness. So who would like to try the first oyster?